thing that's going on that I don't as much like, and that's I think like artificial kind of friendships, like artificial like friendships, like people putting too much weight in like social media interactions, if you know what I mean. Putting too much weight or like thinking that that's like a normal like, hey, I just replied to somebody's tweet, that felt like a human interaction today.
Okay,
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not really a human interaction today. And I think for me, for like a long period of time, those were the interactions I was having with people because they were somewhat like work related, or it was just that in work calls.
Yeah.
And making sure that these relationships that we're building on the close personal level where we're vulnerable with people are on a personal level where it's you're able to like maybe this sounds old fashioned, but kind of look somebody in the face and be
No,
able to talk to them and like communicate directly with them.
I remember going there and it was like 6 or 7 of us, and I was like really craving um honest interactions with people, like genuine interactions with people. But I sat down at the dinner table and I'm looking around and everybody is just like looking at their phone and like tweeting and stuff. And then I'm like, what is everybody doing? And I open up my phone and I look at social media or Twitter or whatever. And like all the people that were at that dinner that were like, best dinner ever with my friends, crushing this dinner. Like they were hyping up this dinner as like the greatest thing ever. And then when I actually looked around, nobody was actually talking to each other. And it ended up being like incredibly depressing. Put me in a bad mood, put me in a huge bummer mood. How are you doing? Kind of
I've been better.
Yeah. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on today. I usually like to give a little bit of a disclaimer before we do the pod, which is that both you and I are going to speak from our own experience when it comes to mental health issues. But as far as I understand, you're not a licensed professional, right? And
nope.
I am not either. So what works for Dylan or what works for myself may not be exactly what you need. And the best way for you to figure out what you do need is to seek a professional if you're having these kinds of questions. So with the disclaimer out of the way, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
My name is Dylan Burns. I work in a lot of local politics. I also stream mostly about politics on Twitch. I also host a roundtable called the Hippy Dippy Roundtable. And I've just been, growing and trying to make my way on Twitch as I also try to make my way through college and try to work in local politics. And I'm on my local environmental board, and that's what I do mostly. Yeah, just local politics.
You go to college right now as well? You're taking classes?
Yes, I am about to start. I'm just transferred from a community college I got accepted into the University of Maryland.
That's right. Yeah, you
international relations there.
Right, you tweeted about that. Good for you. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you very much.
And how long exactly have you been doing streaming YouTube stuff?
I've been streaming since January 1st of 2020, so not even 2 years yet, but about 1 year and 8 months, almost 9.
Wow. Okay, so how did you get? Because your podcast, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're pretty much like the biggest regular political panel channel, right?
On Twitch at this point, yeah. I can't think of any other panel show. So yeah, we do have that distinction. I got started after I was getting politically involved. I was getting involved in like local politics with the Mike Gravel. Well, this isn't local, but this is national. With the Mike Gravel campaign, I was managing a local mayoral campaign in my city of College Park, Patrick Wilhans. And after I like got some experience, I was looking at a lot of these online political commentators. And I would just like drop a message in chat with a donation, like, hey, this is from one of the Gravel kids or something like that. And that would catch people's eyes because I think a lot of people on like political Twitch at the time, like 1 year and 8 months ago, like the idea of like people who I guess somewhat actually do like politics engaging with the political sphere felt a little weird. And so they gave me an open door and allowed me to come on their platforms and talk about politics. So I was able to use that to get access to communities, talk to these communities. And eventually when I thought I guess were somewhat interested in what I had to say, I would start my own show, and I started my own stream, and yeah, the rest is history.
What would you say is the because you went from relative obscurity to a pretty prominent presence within Twitch politics in a pretty short amount of time. So I'm just curious, like, how do you? I'm sure that took work. It's not like you just kind of stumbled into it and lucked into it. Because I think Twitch isn't so much governed by algorithms in the same way that other social media companies are. So
Hmm.
what would you say have been the most major contributing factors to that sort of ascension in this space?
I think one is I filled like a niche that I don't think anybody else was filling when I was specifically talking about foreign policy. And so when there was ever any like big foreign policy event, even though I don't like to call myself an expert because I'm still studying, I'm still learning, even if I've had some jobs around the issue,
Mhm.
people would come to my show and it would be like, "Oh, foreign policy thing happened. Let's go on the show." And that would be one big thing that I think contributed to it. Another big thing, other big things is like larger content creators like Vosh, Destinies, people like that, giving me access to their communities allowed me to, put myself in front of a lot of people that were then interested in more what I've had to say. So
Mhm.
access and collaboration were super important for me growing. I think that, and this is not like a new complaint, I'm not breaking any ground here, but Twitch's discoverability is not wonderful. And so if you want to get discovered on Twitch, you've got to somehow put yourself in front of people. Either that's through YouTube or if that's through other already established content creators. And so I would say collaboration and trying to fill a specific niche that somebody else isn't filling. So people have a reason to want to go to watch you instead of someone else. Like there's a million people who like play like a video game with like very like semi funny commentary. You got to find something that's different.
Yeah. And you've had kind of an interesting week. So I realized I did watch your sort of co-stream with Prime, and I
Yep.
know that you agreed to not necessarily like discuss him too much, but I'd be sort of remiss if like I didn't mention that you had kind of a tough week. Do you want to talk like a little bit about that, or do you want to just move straight into the uh
I can talk a little bit about it, but I'll keep it a little restrained.
well, let me just say, like, let me just open with an observation. One of the hardest things that you can do as a creator, and I've been a creator in one space or another for like 12 years. One of the hardest
Mhm.
things that you can do when you make a mistake is to just get up there and own that mistake. Don't make 1,000 excuses for it. Just straight up say, this is something that I did. I shouldn't have done it. Here's why I shouldn't have done it. And I will try to be better. That can be really difficult because the internet can be unrelenting in their criticism, which can be quite stressful. But saying nothing of the mistake that I think that you made, I think that you getting up there and just owning it the way that you did was commendable. So I just want to give you props for that.
I appreciate that. So what happened was that I believed, I won't even mention names because I just so it doesn't perpetuate anything. But I believe that somebody was engaging in extremely inappropriate behavior with somebody that I care a lot about. That ended up not being true, and I did the really stupid thing of due to being like over emotional and being like super invested. Um, I didn't properly prepare and I took that public when I should have probably resolved the issue privately. That's the most explanation I'll give because I'm trying my best to somewhat respect the person's wishes and not really like continuing this.
Uh huh.
And while that was going on, and I was getting probably the most backlash I've ever gotten, which deserved, right? My father also had a major heart attack where he was dead for 11 minutes and had to be revived. And so I was dealing with these two things at the same time where my father like he has lung cancer and is an older gentleman, he's near his 60s now, um doing that and hoping just to god he doesn't die because he's my last remaining parent. I lost my mom back in 2017. And also with this online stuff it was yeah, it's probably the most difficult one of the most difficult weeks I've had in a while. Yeah.
How does that manifest for you? Because like when I'm stressed, for example, I will isolate. I'll just spend a lot of time by myself, in my room, lights off, watching movies or doing whatever. That's basically my big coping mechanism, is to just take a step back from everything. Don't even look at text messages. Don't even look at emails. What do you do when you get overwhelmed doing this stuff?
So my way I've always like dealt with situations, and I think it isn't healthy, and that's why I'm trying to work on it, is when I get stressed, I just work and I just work 10 times harder because if I stop and I sit down, I can break down because then I start thinking about stuff. I start looking at the wall. And so for me, it's a lot better, or this is what I felt for a while. It was a lot better to just be angry and work and like throw it at something. And that's how I got some of the most like, and it's weird because that's how I was for some of the most productive times of my life is when I was doing that. But that was also really unhealthy because what I was doing is I was taking these issues, I basically like sticking them away. One example of this was I remember the day after my mom died. My mom was a heroin addict, and it ended up taking her life. Uh, the next day, I went to school, and I didn't even need to go to school. I just did it, and the teachers didn't even want me there, but I did it because I just wanted to keep working, and I didn't like the idea of stopping my rhythm or stopping my movement. And that was something that I've done for a while. That's like I think super unhealthy. And so what I'm trying to get better at is just like more being more expressive of my emotions, taking more time to process stuff, sit back and disconnect. Because if I'm even like near like something I could use to work, I'm gonna work. And I need to learn to like actually give myself a break. And recently during a different thing, I took a vacation for the first time in like 3 years. I think it was maybe two and a half. To LA after I had made an attempt.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably the best thing I could have possibly done for myself was just take that time to just relax, sit back. I still worked a little bit, but sit
Yeah.
back and relax with a good friend of mine called Wicked Supreme. I don't know if you've met them before. And
I'm familiar with who he is, I think. But yeah, go ahead.
yeah, he let me stay at his place in LA, and that was actually finally like sitting down and relaxing and just contemplating about like where I am in my life, what I want to do with my life was probably the best thing I could have done, and I'm so happy I did it. And then went to LA and took that time to sit down.
Yeah, I think that's really good. That's one thing I talk about quite a bit on the pod with other creators is the importance of taking time when you need time, because especially when you're on the come up, it can be really counterintuitive to slow down and take a break, because in the beginning when you're experiencing a lot of growth, it can be kind of exponential in a way, and so there's this urge, this really strong urge to keep that going, and the thought of stepping away from that for like a week or 2 weeks or even 3 weeks, but there's no fucking rules for this thing, is almost unthinkable to a lot of people. And having been someone who's burned out a couple different times, I don't have that problem anymore. Like if I need time off, I just take time off. So I think it is important to do that, especially if you're going to do that, to spend some time with friends, because depression and anxiety, these things in many ways I think are diseases of isolation. And sometimes it requires a little bit of effort to make sure you're staying connected with people that you trust and care about. Why don't we back up a little bit? Can you talk to me about your upbringing? Where were you raised? What kind of an environment were you raised in?
So I was raised in a broken household. My mom, of course, she used heroin. She was a drug addict. She even used it when she was pregnant with me. So it was a pretty like aggressive addiction. And so because of that, I would go from house to house to house. And my mom and my father never got married. She actually ran away from my father to have me with my grandparents because she was scared about like the type of environment I would be with my father, because my father does not have the most the best way I can describe him is like a pool hustler. I don't know how else to really describe him. It's difficult. But so I would occasionally like be with my grandparents, and then it'd be like, okay, let's try having you with your mom again. But then my mom would start using, and because of that, I would be put in really not appropriate situations for like a very young child to be. Like I would be brought to drug houses for her to like consume and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I moved around a lot, and I got a like really bad like abandonment issues, because I would not really stay anywhere for too long of a time. And
when you
my
say
mother's drug use was yeah.
well, I was just going to ask you to expand on. I have a really surface level understanding of what abandonment issues are. I have a whole host of other issues, but that's not one of them for me. What do you mean when you say that? How does that affect your life? How does that affect your attachments and your relationships?
It's very difficult for me to trust people. it's extremely difficult for me to trust people, or for me to like develop relationships with people where I don't think that like these are people that are going to just like eventually they're going to backstab me, or they're going to abandon me, or they're going to do any of these types of things.
I see.
And so for me, it was always difficult for me to like build relationships and friendships with people, because I saw all of these things as like extremely temporary, or they don't really like me. And I've always had this like feeling of like a needing to like prove myself in some way,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like people don't actually like legitimately want me to be around. And
What were your relationships with like your peers? Because you're talking about your home life, but how did you get on with your peers when you were a kid?
I was a pretty violent kid. I remember like a good example of this, and this is just me being like 100% transparent, is I remember like having the cops have to like come pat me down and drag me out because I was mugging people in school bathrooms, right? I got in a lot of fights. I I was a pretty violent kid, and of course I liked video games and stuff like that, but when it came to relationships with peers, I didn't have a lot of friends. I guess you could say I was a loner generally.
Okay, and so I think if anybody watches your stream for a little bit of time, they can tell right away that you're very informed, um, very logical person. So,
Mhm.
did you pour yourself into academics when you were a kid? Was that one of the ways that you coped with a unstable environment?
Not well, kind of. I would say for elementary and middle school, I was just getting in fights and just getting in trouble, and I was basically failing all my classes. And then I got accepted into this one school called College Park Academy. And once I hit high school, there was this realization, because it was always drilled to me into a kid. Once you hit high school, like the records are permanent. Nobody really cares about your middle school report card, right? Nobody really cares about your elementary school stuff. But once you hit high school, that's when colleges start looking. And I looked at the position my mom was in. I looked at the position my father was in. I looked at the fact that nobody in my immediate family had ever graduated college. And I don't know how to put it besides I just looked at that and I was like, I don't want this for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because the last period of my life has not been that great. And so what I did was I got on a I was always taking medication, but I got on some pretty strict ADHD medications because I have ADHD, and I just poured myself into getting the best possible grades I could. And a lot of it had to do with not wanting to live the same life my parents did, but a lot of it also had to do with the fact that around that time I found something that I actually cared about. Up to that point, all I cared about mostly was video games. At that point, I got interested in politics because I wanted to connect the issues that I found in my life to the issues that I saw politically. Like, why is it that my mom was arrested for her drug use when that obviously didn't help her?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that my mom is homeless? She was a homeless resident in DC when she deserves like housing. Why is it that all these things are happening? And I tried to connect those issues to what I think would have been the best solutions. And I remember it's somebody I don't even like watch anymore, but I think the first person who actually got me interested in politics, and this is true for a lot of people my age, is actually Kyle Kalinske, because it was just like running around on YouTube and I
Mm-hmm.
saw like a political video talking about, I think it was drug use or something. And
Yeah.
that was the first time I engaged with politics, was actually Kyle Kalinske, which is strange thinking about like how much I disagree with many of his analysis, how much of his stuff today.
Well, yeah, when I first started getting into politics, like Michael Moore was like one of my big heroes back then. And since I've taken more time to develop a deeper understanding of the things that I believe in, I've sort of drifted away from it. I think it's pretty common. Like the person who gets you into politics isn't necessarily the person that you line up with one to one, maybe 10 years or 20 years later. Can you recall,
Oh yeah.
because for me, it was as soon as I started reading A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. It was a
Mhm.
sociology 101 course. It was like real intro level course. I was a business major declared at the time. So I thought I wanted to do stuff with like advertising, which, you know, funny enough, I actually, you know, in a way, I sort of ended up doing that in my own way. But I thought I wanted to be a business admin major. I discovered that book and it just truly blew my mind. And from that point on, I felt like I was just changed. I was just not the same. And it was the only thing that I cared about, learning about why September 11th happened, and learning about why we were invading Iraq, and learning about previous conflicts that we engaged in. I became like really fascinated with the anti-war movement and the Vietnam War. And then it just, from then on, it just kind of snowballed from there. Can you recall if there was one thing in particular that really kind of grabbed you, or was it more of a slow process of you becoming more politically engaged?
I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was like generally angry, and I wanted something to like direct anger at. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that anger was
Well,
like
Kalinsky's good
just
for for that
yes.
kind of thing. So
Exactly.
kind of
That's
makes
why I
sense.
think he pulled me in, because he was like, you know what? Damn right. You're right. That is the person I should be angry at, or that is the group. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had this very kind of like one-to-one like idea in my mind where I wanted like a reason or like someone to blame for like the situation in my life.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like, well, this is easy. Kyle Kalinske told me that the reason my mom is this is because the rich are too greedy. And even though it's super simplistic, it was like that was like my introduction. It was like the reason why she doesn't have this is that. And
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't that's what got me to first listen, but what got me hooked like on like politics, I think, on like what I ended up specializing in, which was foreign affairs, would probably be the war in Syria and live map technology, or the live map programs. Have you ever like stumbled upon a live map on like a war or conflict in the Middle East?
No.
So if you look up like Syria live map or Afghanistan live map or anything live map, there's these online. They're not like especially good programs, but I went to a school where we had computers with us. College Park Academy was like a mostly online school, and so what I would do is once I finished my studies, I would go on to live map, these live map website for like the war in Syria, and I would go by every battle, every day, every single conflict, and like every single fight that would happen every day, day to day to day. And I do that for months, just try to figure out how every troop movement worked, how every single organization interacted with other organizations, and that's how I slowly got interested in the Syrian civil war. And
Did
so
you
then when I
did you
had the
play a lot of Risk when you were a kid? I'm just wondering if there was like some other kind of connection there for you.
there was a Hearts of Iron was what I played.
Oh, okay.
Paradox games, stuff like that. I like the Total War series. Maps interest me. I've always had an interest in maps. I remember I once went. I was like a camp counselor for a short period of time, and I would during my breaks I would bring maps to school, and I would just like well, not to school but to the camp, and I would actually just look at the maps and like how they interacted and how what the different symbols meant. But
You're kind of a weirdo, you know that, right? Like
yeah,
nobody gets into foreign policy when they're young. That's just such a
nobody. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a weirdo. Yeah,
well, that's not
but
a
hey,
bad
I
that's
mean,
not a
it's
bad
okay to
thing.
be
I'm just
weird.
saying. Yeah,
It's
no,
not bad.
it's great. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit more about that development. So you're in high school, you're just sort of getting into politics. Did you stop fighting as much then?
I would say at around actually yes, and the big reason why is I got into boxing. I started boxing out of Sugar Ray Leonard's gym up in Palmer Park, which was great for me because it allowed me to like kind of like vent a lot of those frustrations in a contained, somewhat safe environment, right?
Mhm.
Which was very helpful. And I got a lot of good friendships out of that. And it was actually something where I think I learned a lot more about like how to like properly like socialize with people. Because before that, I was still like very much like it was hard for me to like connect with people on a personal level.
Yeah,
But being in that environment, like if you're gonna get your ass beat by someone, you at least want to know their name, right?
sure. I
And
mean,
so that was
do you
good.
still do that? I mean, if it was such a positive thing for you, is that something that you kept up?
I wish I could. It's just my schedule is so now just so full of work because I've got college coming up. I work for a political PAC. I'm doing some campaign stuff, and I also stream as a full-time job. And that's just like a few of the things I'm doing. I'm also an environmental board member for the city of College Park, and I have so much stuff going on that I want to do it and I want to get back in shape, but it's just a time crunch. So I've been trying to
Sure.
figure out for a while how to get back into it.
Are you taking? I find that for me, it's really important that I take. It used to be 1 day off, and now it's 2 days off. I take the weekends off, but for a long time it was like 6 days a week. Not like crazy amount of hours, but yeah, usually 6 days a week was the schedule. Do you give yourself like a set day off each week to just unwind and pursue things that bring you joy and contentment and relaxation and rewardment and et cetera, et cetera?
I've been trying to get better at that. I don't really have days off. I usually work basically every day of the week. I have to do stuff for the political pack every day of the week. I have to make sure videos are getting pumped out of YouTube. We publish 2 videos on YouTube a day, which is a lot, I think, for definitely of a channel my size.
Fuck yeah, that's a
We're
lot.
yeah, yeah, we're also working on like developing TikToks and all this other stuff, and all the campaign stuff. And not to mention, like, school is going to be like a massive, like, school was like, it was so difficult to balance school and streaming. So I don't really get days off. So what I'm trying to do more of is just get better at time management. Because what I'll do is when I end stream is I'll open up Twitter, then I'll
Mhm.
like scroll for 2 hours and be
Yep.
like, what the hell? I just wasted like 2 valuable hours where I could have read that book I like. I could have played some Red Dead Redemption. I could have
Yeah.
watched my wrestling because I love wrestling. But no, instead I just scrolled on Twitter pointlessly for 2 hours. And so I'm trying to get better at time management.
I used to be a huge wrestling fan, Dylan. Did you know this about me? A huge wrestling fan.
I am such a massive wrestling fan right now. I even like watch the dark matches. Like I am
Well, how do you
pretty
even
I'm,
watch? Or do you just find them online now?
so I don't really watch WWE. I watch this rival company called All Elite Wrestling, AEW.
Oh, I'm
And they
familiar.
actually they have their dark matches on YouTube. There's Evolution, there's Dark. They now have Rampage, which is the Friday program. On Wednesdays, they've got Dynamite.
Yeah.
Of course, they got the pay-per-views. CM Punk just returned. I mean, there's a lot to be hyped about right now.
I just can't do it anymore. I don't know what happened to me. It was like, as soon as I started college, like the more I was watching these and wrestling was kind of like, I feel like on the decline then. It was like the Attitude Era was just sort of coming to a close. And then it was just sort of like the era of like Brock Lesnar and, it just wasn't as like interesting to me. And then for some reason, just one day I'm like, you know what? I think I'm done with wrestling. And then I just couldn't get interested in it anymore. But I was obsessed with it for so long. I used to play WCW versus NWO on Nintendo 64. And then there was I think there was a sequel to that, Revenge, I think was what it was called. And then there was WrestleMania 2000. And then there was No Mercy, which was like the fucking coolest wrestling game of all time. And I would just play those obsessively. We had a wrestling club in high school, which is not like people that get together and do wrestling. We would sit in the math class trailer outside and just talk about like WCW and WWF. And I was the president of that I was a huge wrestling fan. Juventud Guerrero was my favorite wrestler back
Did you see he recently had a match with Chris Jericho?
No.
He made a return big match on the big stage against Chris Jericho. Yeah.
Wow. He had he had the dopest finishers. He had the Hoovy driver, and then he had the 450 frog splash, which was just such an incredible move to see live. And Jericho, turns out, isn't he like a MAGA guy now? Didn't he get caught like?
Yeah, he's a
donating?
MAGA guy. Played at Sturgis. Everybody got COVID. He donated a ton of money to the Trump campaign. And honestly, if you want my opinion, this is gonna piss off a lot of people. It's kind of hard to watch him wrestle anymore, man. It's kind of difficult.
Really?
Yeah,
What do you
he's
mean?
50
Why?
something, and it's just everything doesn't have the same pop. It doesn't have the same skill, and it feels like he can't sell anymore, which really sucks. Like he can throw a few good moves, good, but it feels like anytime he gets punched or like hit, he just doesn't sell.
What was Triple H's finisher called again? What was it called again? Where he would do the underarm pile driver? Fuck, what was it called, guys? A pedigree. Remember that finish? Yeah. Nobody knew how to fucking sell that. Especially The Rock. The Rock would always put one knee down. Maybe I'm just like demanding too much because maybe you can get really injured doing that, but nobody fucking sold that well at all. But
My problem is I don't think anybody sells strikes anymore. I feel like people get hit and then they're just like throw another punch back, and then that'll happen for like 10 minutes, and that'll be like their strikes. Like they don't know, like getting punched isn't just like I got hit, let me hit back. Like you should like sell that.
Yeah, I guess, you know what? Listen, I'm going to give Jericho a pass for the MAGA stuff just because he was like my hero as a kid. He was one of my favorites for sure. He was one of the funniest wrestlers, I think, of all time. Anyways, we digress.
I was a huge Undertaker guy.
Oh, were you? Are you talking Tombstone pile driver or the last ride to Undertaker?
I'm talking Tombstone urn like Undertaker.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking like Paul Bearer.
Yeah. Dude, he would always have these matches with Kane, and I would bet $5 on Kane every time they had a match of pay-per-view. Fucking Kane never, ever beat him. I think Kane beat him one time. I lost like $30 over the years, which was, back then as a high schooler, there was a lot of money. But yeah, we digress. So, sort of like looking at Twitter to me is like something that I still struggle with too. It's like gazing into the Palantir in Lord of the Rings. It's just so hard to look away. And then some days when I take off, especially with like things being not locked down, but I'm definitely like more reluctant to go out right now just because of like the Delta variant and how much it's affecting Los Angeles because it's running pretty wild here. And so there are days where I just like stay indoors, I just smoke some weed and just like scroll through Twitter for fucking like 5 or 6 hours. And I never feel good at the end of doing it. At the end of doing it, I'm always like, I could have read a book. I could have played a game that gave me joy. I could have like called an old friend to reconnect, but no, I just stood there staring at my phone for like 6 hours. So yeah, that's something I still struggle with.
I could have beaten Red Dead Redemption 4 times by now if I just stayed off Twitter. Honestly,
you still haven't you still haven't beat it yet?
it's Red Dead 2. No, I've been playing it for like 3 months now.
Oh my God. Red Dead 2 is one of my favorite games of all time.
It's so good.
Yeah. It's such a great story too. Well, let's try to get back to some mental health stuff here. As much as I want to talk to you about Red Dead and WWF and all that, we do a podcast about mental health stuff. So
Of course.
So recently you had an experience in an institution. I was wondering if you'd be open to talking about what that was like. And of course, if I ask you any questions and you're not comfortable with anything, you can just tell me and we can move on to something else.
Yeah, I'm fine. I can talk about it. So I recently made a well, not recently, but a few months ago I made an attempt on my own life. I attempted to hang myself in my room back there, and it didn't work. I didn't pay attention in Boy Scouts, so I didn't tie the knot properly. Thank goodness. And afterwards, I had a call with a friend because I was going to do it again, and they called the cops. And the cops came to my house, and the cops gave me two options, but they didn't really give me two options. They basically said we can take you with us voluntarily or involuntarily. So you're going with the cops. You don't have an option. The really what they're saying is, are we going to have to restrain you, or are we going to have to take you the easy way? And
Is
so,
there
of course,
is there a difference in the time that you're detained? If it's voluntary or involuntary?
the ways to explain to me when I was in the institution is that they said that if I would have done it involuntarily and said no, they would have been like, "Oh, okay, well then it's going to be more difficult to get you out, and you're going to get out a lot slower."
Hmm.
I don't know exactly why, but that's what it was explained to me. That basically, if you try to stop the process in any way, they'll use that as an indication that you're not changing or you're not getting better, and so they use that as a reason to keep you in longer.
Mm.
Which
I'm trying to be
obviously
careful with when we have this conversation because I also don't want to discourage people from seeking institutionalization if they feel like that's what they need. So
Yeah.
it's a little tricky of a conversation to have because I've also known people that have been in institutions and they've had some unpleasant stories as well. I've also known a lot of people that greatly benefited from being in an institution. It literally saved their lives. So I guess I just want to add that little disclaimer.
Yeah,
when we're having
it
this
was weird
conversation.
because when I talked about this experience, a lot of people said like, "Dylan, stop," because they were like, "You're giving a really bad impression." But I just also want to say that once I got in there, and this I think will explain particularly how bad it was, or why it was so bad in particular, it was because while I was in the ambulance, they basically asked, of course, for my insurance card, and then they asked, "What hospital do you want to go to?" And there was two options, and I was like, "I don't know the difference, so just take me to the best one," right? But then what they ended up doing was just taking me to the one, I guess, with more vacancies or something. And the one they took me to was a hospital that is notorious in this area for being like the worst hospital in the state. Not only is it the worst hospital in the state, but it was closing 1 month after I was put in there because of how bad it was. And so that not only means that they were closing it down because it was a bad hospital, but that all the workers had already like mentally checked out. Like they were already like, we're done here. Either I'm losing my job and I'm getting out of here, or I'm moving to this new hospital. And so by the time I got there, I really wish that I knew more and I couldn't have gone there. But that's particularly, I think, why this was such a bad experience when I was in this institution. Because then once I got there, they took all my stuff, right? And then they had me in like the hallway for about what must have been like 6 to 8 hours, just sitting in like laying on a bed in the hallway. And there were people like I think who also had mental issues, like walking back. I don't know what to call it, but they were like rapping, through like doing like slam poetry, and it was like very difficult to get sleep. They put like the injected, not injected, but they took a blood sample, but they didn't like do it properly. It almost felt like they just went like this, which did left a pretty bad mark on my arm for about a month. And man, I can just say, like, I probably had one of the worst times of my life in that institution, and honestly made me worse. And I'm so happy that I got to go to LA after, because I there's just so many horror stories from that place. Whether it be like people like having like freak out sessions and like smashing like the one phone we were actually allowed to call family members on, whether it was like the person I was bunked with having a lot of mental issues and like making a ton of sounds in the middle of the night so I wasn't able to get any sleep, whether it was like the workers there being super uncooperative and just dragging me around, or even lying to me about, oh, you're gonna be able to get out tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes, says, oh no, I meant tomorrow, and then keeps on going.
So
And
how long?
I just
How long was
was
your
really
stay there?
bad. I was like, it was about a week. It was about a week,
Hmm.
and it was
Wow.
honestly like the whole time I just tried to do my best to keep my head down and get through it, because it was really awful. And the
So
thing I hated so much was, and I never like, I don't know how to call it, but I never really understood how much I like valued, even though I stay in my apartment most of the time, how much I valued like my ability to move around where I want to, my ability to leave at any point. Like if I want to get out of my if I wanted to end this interview right now and leave, I could. Like you can't stop me. I could go out and I could walk to a 7-Eleven, get a Slurpee. I
Mhm.
couldn't do that. Everything was regimented.
Yep.
And I never knew how much that would bother me, that lack of freedom to move around,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
and options that were made available to me, as I just basically waited for the days to end.
Well, when I went to a I went through a tough time when I was like 19. I went to a treatment facility for like substance abuse. And you wake up at 6:30 every morning, and then you have like a group setting, like opening meeting. And then you break for breakfast, and then you come back at 9 and there's a class, and then you take like a 15-minute break, and then you come back, there's another class, and then you take a lunch break, and then maybe you do some writing, and then there's another class, small little break, another class, small little break, and then a meeting that comes into the facility. And then by the time it ends, it's about 9 p.m. and then you're tired and you go to bed, and you just do that every single day. There's no variation. It's the same exact schedule every week after week for 28 days. And the first week or two that I was there, I was very stir crazy, like what you're describing. I was just used to having freedom. Like if I wanted to get in my car and drive and go get barbecue sandwich or something like that, just not being able to do that puts you in a strange place mentally.
Yeah.
And then I found that after 2 weeks, I got very used to that regimented schedule, and I ended up taking a lot of comfort in that schedule. And so by the time I left the facility, I actually didn't want to leave. And so it took me, obviously the facility that you were at sounds like, you know, there's some problems there, but it could also be the case that your need for freedom in that moment was so strong that it made the experience a lot worse for you. Anyways, that's just my experience. I wanted to like sort of offer a sort of a different experience with institutionalization, so that somebody that's maybe listening to this can understand that there are positive experiences as well. Even though you had a bad time in the facility, would you say that the experience itself led to sort of a wake-up call for yourself where you
I will say, like, there was two things. Number one, it helped. If there was one thing I was able to get one soft cover book. They wouldn't allow hardcover, but I got one soft cover book in there, so I was able to rediscover a love for reading, which was good. And I would say that it did motivate me. Now, this is kind of a backhanded compliment, what I'm about to say. It did motivate me not to attempt again, because if I did, I might end up back in one of those institutions. And so that was like a weird kind of backhanded compliment, but it did kind of like put me in a position of like, okay, maybe like, yeah, no, I don't like this lifestyle. I don't want to make this like a thing of my like daily life where this happens every few years.
It's also extremely permanent, Dylan. Like apart from the unpleasant experience of being in that particular facility, that way of dealing with emotional pain is the most permanent thing that you can do to address that. And don't know if I'm overstepping my bounds a little bit here, but I just want to tell you from my own experience, I've had times in my life where I went 6 months to a year and a half of daily suicidal ideation. Not to the point where I was developing like a serious plan, but it was always in the back of my head. Like I was in so much pain that I wanted to reserve that option for myself, and having that option made me feel like at the very least there is a way out. And I went through a couple different times of being in that kind of intense pain where I'm thinking to myself, it's never going to end. Like this pain is never going to end. I'm just going to be like this for the rest of my life. And, you know, with the help of friends and sometimes professionals and especially family, you know, my sister was like really there for me at the time. My sister Tiffany like really helped me out in a tough time. I was able to get past that. And then now I'm at a point in my life where this is the happiest I've ever been in my life, for sure. So you never know what your future will hold. And you may convince yourself in the moment that it's awful and it's never going to get better, but you really don't know. Like there's so much time ahead of you. So I hope that it's more than just you not wanting to go back to that particular facility.
I was just talking about how that facility impacted me. There was other things that impacted me that benefited me. I would say the trip to LA really reinvigorated me. I think the change of scenery was something that I needed. I needed something outside of the cycle that I had fallen into of just like constant work, pass out, work, pass out. I mean, I didn't even get to my bed on a lot of days. I would just fall over on the day bed and just fall asleep and wake up and see, oh, it's time to get to work, and then like go to work, which is extremely unhealthy. So being able to break that monotony and go over to LA and like explore these places I've never been before, hang out with friends, be around people, because this was also the first time I ever lived on my own, and I had to leave my last place because a family member of mine tried to strangle me to death. So I had to leave that place about like 4 or 5 months ago and like move in on my own in this apartment. And so I'm not only dealing with this monotony, but also being alone for the first time in my life. So being able to get into a new environment to break that repetition and be around people that I genuinely believe care about me was very helpful. And then when I got back down here, I did feel a lot better.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because that's been my experience too, is like, nobody truly ever like pulls themselves up by their bootstraps when it comes to mental health stuff. I don't think. I mean, maybe it happens, but I'm just going to assume that it's exceedingly rare. It's been my experience that it comes from, you know, relief, a large amount of relief that comes from that pain that you feel, comes from being around people that you trust and you know that care about you. So I wonder if we can sort of like lean into that a little bit. And if you could just sort of elaborate like what it meant to you to be around people that you trusted at that time in your life.
Support systems are so important to me, and I think that it was difficult because of my ability to not trust people. That I have kind of like pushed away support systems that were necessary to have. And so when I went to LA and I just like trusted Supreme because he's somebody I do genuinely trust, it helped a ton because I got to connect with him and have a lot of like deep personal conversations about things. And having those deep personal conversations with Supreme, being able to just relax and hang out with all these people, having that change of environment, that to rebuilding and building up support structures where I know, and of course there's always this thing in the back of my head of like, oh, you're being a burden if you tell somebody, right? Which is always a thing, but 99% of the time, these people care about you and they want that you've built support structures with, and they 100% any bother that could ever possibly be caused by you messaging them is immediately outweighed by their care for you and just trusting in that if you need that, you can message them.
Yeah.
And even that doesn't even mean you necessarily need to message them. Just knowing that you can do that sometimes it's enough for me. And with Supreme, that is something I know. I've also like rekindled like other friendships with other people that I can do that with. And I think that's been really helpful to me, because I think the loneliness of being in this new place alone for the first time after everything that happened, with the type of work schedule I had, was draining me. And I needed support structures and I needed other people. And I needed to be able to give some people some trust if I was going to be able to like keep going.
Yeah, your friends that you trust can be quite the emotional lifeline. What I found for me was the most important thing was just not feeling judged, because when I was in the worst of it, it kind of made me feel like an alien. I don't know if that's your experience, but it made other people feel, it made familiar people feel strange, and it made people that were strangers even more strange. Like I had become wary and skeptical and untrusting of people that I know had my best interest in heart and loved me and weren't judging me or anything like that. And then if it was people that I didn't know, I just assumed that they weren't safe. And when you have that sort of an outlook, it's incredibly isolating. It's just you and your brain at that point. And I was lucky enough to have friends where open, frank discussions about mental health struggles were not only normal, but they were encouraged. And so being able to have conversations about, you know, my deepest fears, my deepest concerns, these unpleasant, painful emotions that I was feeling, and then knowing that the person that was listening to me wasn't judging me or in their head thinking that I was some weirdo, you know, they would just nod their head and listen a lot of the times. And I can't tell you how much that mattered to me to know that, number one, somebody cared. Number two, somebody didn't think less of me for what I was going through. And I think your generation, I think, is doing a better job of, because you're about, you know, I think you're literally half my age, but I think your generation is doing a better job with encouraging and fostering the normalization of being vulnerable in a way that my generation wasn't doing it as much. Like there was some of that going on, but you guys have the benefit of internet and instant communication and, you know, meeting people. Even if you live in a small town or whatever, you can meet like-minded people online and sort of develop relationships that way. And I think you guys are doing a really good job of changing that norm.
I would say that is a norm that is really good, that's changing. I will also say though that there's also another thing that's going on that I don't as much like, and that's, I think, like artificial kind of friendships, like artificial like friendships, like people putting too much weight in like social media interactions, if you know what I mean. Putting too much weight, or like thinking that that's like a normal, like, hey, I just replied to somebody's tweet, you know, that felt like a human interaction today.
Okay,
Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not really a human interaction today. And I think for me, for like a long period of time, those were the interactions I was having with people, because they were somewhat like work related, or it was just that in work calls.
Yeah.
And making sure that these relationships that we're building on the close personal level, where we're vulnerable with people, are on a personal level, where it's you're able to like, maybe this sounds old fashioned, but kind of look somebody in the face and
No.
be able to talk to them and like communicate directly with them.
Yeah. I remember there was a time like 10 years ago where I went to dinner with a bunch of my friends, and all of my friends and I worked in the same kind of, like, we were working for this company that was like really starting to become big on the internet back then. It was this company called Machinima. We did a bunch of like gaming stuff. And I remember going there, and it was like 6 or 7 of us. And I was like really craving honest interactions with people, like genuine interactions with people. But I sat down at the dinner table, and I'm looking around, and everybody is just like looking at their phone and like tweeting and stuff. And then I'm like, what is everybody doing? And I open up my phone and I look at social media or Twitter or whatever, and like all the people that were at that dinner that were like, best dinner ever with my friends, crushing this dinner, like they were hyping up this dinner as like the greatest thing ever. And then when I actually looked around, nobody was actually talking to each other, and it ended up being like incredibly depressing. Put me in a bad mood, put me in a huge bummer mood.
I need to work on that, because sometimes I'll be talking with people and they'll just get on my phone, and I'll get on my, and it's not always Twitter. It'll sometimes just be checking emails and stuff like that. And it's something I really need to work on, is making sure that I give the people I talk to my full attention when I'm talking to them, because that's when I'm going to have like the most productive conversations. Because I'm only half listening, then I'm not going to remember that conversation in a few days. And if this is important conversation, then I just missed a lot of information. And that ability to communicate is just like completely just like undermined. So I'm trying to get a lot better at just knowing to put the phone down, unironically.
What about just putting the fucking phone down anytime you're hanging out with your friends? Like, why can't that be the norm? Why can't it be just accepted that, you know, like maybe selfies are okay or whatever, but like just, you know, if you're out to dinner with like a group of friends or whatever, just keep your phone in your pocket the whole time.
I found that not even just that, but I I always fill my space and environment with so much noise. Whether it's like no matter what I'm doing something. I'm on a podcast, I'm listening to a podcast, I'm on a show, I'm doing something. There's noise constantly happening. There's not a lot of times where I just kind of sit down and just like listen to nothing and just think. And I
Right.
think even just like besides just like putting the phone down, just like having like time to contemplate generally allows me to like process like thoughts more because I'll find that like once those moments happen, I'll start processing stuff from months ago because those moments are just like so rare for me. So I think just having just like periods of time with just no sound period is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very good about that. I usually always have like an earbud in my ear. Like I'm always like listening to a podcast or listening to the news or listening to some YouTube video or music or whatever. Um,
Mhm.
that's something that like my brain is like, I don't want to sound like, you know, r/I am very smart, but my brain is really hyperactive. Like it's just always thinking about something. And I want to be clear, 99% of the time it's fucking nonsense going on in my head.
Mhm.
It's not anything that's profound, not anything that's particularly intelligent. It's just noise, just a lot of noise. And so for me, I've found that having just like an earbud in my ear is something to sort of keep my mind occupied so I don't just like swim in this lake of mental masturbation all the time, which is what I will do if I don't have some kind of a distraction. Someone in my chat mentioned ADHD. Maybe that's the case. I've never been diagnosed with that, but
I've had ADHD. I've used medication for it for a decent part of my life. I stopped doing it once I hit 18 because I wanted to kind of just see if I could go with life unmedicated. And there are some pluses from doing that, and there's some negatives that came from that. I would say like the best things is like there were certain things that it did to change my general behavior, where it'd make me concentrate, but life felt very like gray and dull. I don't know how to like describe it really, but it felt like it was difficult for me to express just basic emotions at times. Um, but then, of course, the benefit was I was super productive, and so I've tried my best to try to like deal with that and try to live. As I've gotten older, and my medical professional said like maybe it's time for you to start getting off of that. Like working on that has been good. That's probably something actually I don't talk about it a lot, but it's something I'm the most personal, probably one of the most personally proud of is the fact that it's not necessary for me to have the medication anymore.
well, can you talk a little bit like I'm not I think I had an idea of what ADHD was in my head for a long time, but the more people talk about it like in my chat with their experience with ADHD, the more I realize that I don't really know much about it at all. Like what how did it affect your life? Like what was ADHD to
So
you?
I'm honestly not a huge expert in it, but I'll tell you exactly how it was always explained to me. Is basically I was told that like it's very difficult for me to just pay attention. It's very difficult for me to like stay occupied with an activity, and that I'm just like gonna be extremely hyperactive. And so how it affected my life is it didn't really matter if I was like super playful or like ran around the house or whatever. What
Mhm.
how it most negatively affected my life was that I it was very difficult for me to pay attention in class, and it really affected my grades. And the worse it affected my grades, obviously, the worse my educational outcomes were. And so the medication was there to help me concentrate in class and do better in class, which it did do, but it also like had those other effects where it felt like I didn't get to express myself properly. I didn't feel the same emotions that I wanted to be feeling. But so for me, the best way, the biggest impact it had on me was made it difficult to concentrate. And I still, off the medication, I still have problems concentrating. I think that's one of the biggest reasons I have my phone problem is I don't mean anything by it, but I'll just go to look at my phone, just start scrolling, stuff like that. I never mean anything by it, but it's just my mind just starts to wander. And I think that's the biggest thing that your mind just starts to wander frequently, more frequently than usual. That's how it always manifested itself in me.
Could it be that because and especially in your case where like you were born like the internet was a thing the entire time
Mhm.
throughout your life? So could it be the case that, you know, well, you could also have like some kind of a, if you want to say chemical imbalance, but also the fact that with the advent of smartphones and high-speed internet, now everybody can occupy their time with something interesting to them any second of the day. Whereas before, if you went out and maybe you weren't having the best conversation with people where there wasn't a lot to do, you would just be sort of stuck there with your thoughts. Like you couldn't just entertain yourself as freely as you could or as you can now. I wonder if that is a part of like why people get so restless these days, is because there's always that option. So like if you don't have the, you're not really digging the conversation that you're having, okay, well, cool. What did this person on Twitter say? You know, like maybe that'll.
Oh yeah, if I didn't have my phone on me, I'd probably be paying a lot more attention. I mean, maybe I would be doing more like hand puppets or finger puppets. I don't know, but it would probably be a lot more difficult. I mean, a lot easier for me to pay attention when talking to people if I didn't have access to the entire world of information that is in a phone. I mean, when you really like, there's a massive amount of things I can do with this tiny device, and always having it in your pocket. I mean, of course, it'll grab your attention if you're having a conversation that isn't the most thrilling conversation in the world, but it's still an important conversation to have.
Can we talk a little bit about the toxic nature of online communities, specifically political online communities?
Sure. I hate to do this, but I also only have 5 more minutes left because I double booked something by accident.
Oh, no, that's fine. Okay, let me close it out with this question then. Because we usually go for about an hour and a half anyway, so that's totally fine. Okay. So because you exist in a space that is dominated by sort of dunk culture, and egos seem to be like the primary driver of a lot of the content that happens on YouTube and on Twitch, especially when it comes to politics. That stuff exists in gaming, but I find for me that's dipped its toes in both camps, that the political stuff just gets way, way, way more supercharged. So I wonder if you have sort of a game plan for yourself to keep your head on straight while being in that Roman Colosseum of ideas.
I would say I have an ego problem. I would say that most people who get involved in politics have an ego problem. Definitely in the way that I am, because I feel like even if it's for good intentions, what you're telling people is that I know how the world works and I have the solution to all the world's problems, or some of the world's problems. And I believe people should listen to me when it comes to like political issues or politics. It does take a certain amount of ego to think that people should take time out of their day to listen to what you have to say about the world's problems. Particularly when I'm saying this about countries sometimes I've never even lived in or seen. It does take a certain amount of ego to do that. And so I do my best to catch my ego, but of course it comes out. And it's even more so when it's in a space that is so driven by the clashing of swords getting so much attention, and how you say, like, the most flamboyant and aggressive takes are going to get the most attention. And so when you're constantly incentivized to pump those numbers up and tell everybody how you're right, and not like say ever, there's no incentive on this platform to be like, huh, you convinced me. That's a really good point. I now agree with you.
Right.
I don't think I've ever seen that actually happen on this platform besides maybe one time. And I think we need to normalize 2 things on the platform that I think would be massive gains. Number 1, actually allowing people to convince you of things. And number 2, being able to say, huh, I think I actually don't know about that. Because I feel like there's a lot of times where people will ask me questions and I'll be like, I don't know. And for some people that's like, wait, he doesn't know the answer to that. And for other people, it's like, oh, well, damn. Because I think when you say, I don't know, that'll, number 1, put more weight in the words you say, because people will be like, well, if he said he doesn't know about this, if he's commenting on this, he might think he actually thinks something.
Yeah.
And it allows you to not believe you need to be the expert in anything and everything, or believe you have to know everything to have a platform or to discuss issues. Yeah. And I think those are 2 small things people could do that I think would actually help the platform a lot.
Well, listen, you're a young man. You're in the I would still say like relatively like beginning stages of growth on social media. And let me just tell you from personal experience, I've known a lot of people that gained a little bit of internet notoriety, and I put myself in this category at different times, and then they thought that meant shit. And I'm telling you, it doesn't mean shit. It's not nearly as important as stopping and asking yourself, am I a good person? Am I a good brother? Am I a good son? Am I a good friend? Am I a good XYZ, et cetera, et cetera. Those things are the only things that matter. And any degree of online notoriety that you get will never replace those things, and it will never replace relationships. So I wish you well on your journey. I wish you good luck and everything. And I want to thank you for taking some time out today to share your experiences with us. I'm sure the chat appreciates you. And if people want to find you, maybe this would be a good time to plug where they can find you on social media.
Hutch, I really appreciated that message. And I would say you can find me at DylanBurnsTV on YouTube. That's DylanBurns TV. I forgot my own name for a second. You can find that on Twitch and on YouTube, and on Twitter you can find me at DylanBurns1776. I appreciate anything you want to, any follows or subs you want to throw my way. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on, Hutch.
Yep. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a nice weekend afterwards.
You too, man. See you later.
Take it easy.